And now, please welcome Human Goods Senior Vice President, Affordable Housing, Jennifer Kappen.
What an inspiring video of what's next for Human Good. Now I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Margot Kushel, who has many titles. She is a professor of medicine at University of California, San Francisco. She's the division chief and director of UCSF Center of Vulnerable Populations, the director of UCSF Benloff Homelessness and Housing Initiative, and the general internist of Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, and that's just to name a few. Her research focuses on the census of the causes and consequences of homelessness and housing instability, with the goal of preventing and ending homelessness and the effects of homelessness and housing instability on health. We are excited to have her here as this is so near and dear to our hearts. Please welcome Dr. Margot Kushel.
I'm old, and I'm tired, and I got my disability. I can't do it no more. These words spoken by an older woman who I met while she was homeless, let's call her Miss C, keeps me up at night. Miss C's words, spoken matter-of-factly, are both a statement of fact and a plea. It's a plea for her to be seen and heard, a plea for her to have a place to rest, to more than rest, to live, to have the safety and security of home that we all enjoy, and that she both needs and deserves. Today, I want to turn Miss C's words into a call for action, a call for all of us to do what we can to make sure that Miss C and all who are like her don't have to wander our streets exhausted, afraid, feeling old and tired, and to be able to live her days with all the quiet dignity that she deserves. But in order to ask you to act, I need to help you understand, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where Miss C, old and tired with her disability, is living out her elderhood outside, unprotected, unseen, and unheard? How did Miss C and all those like her wind up old, tired, and homeless? It seems like everywhere you look these days, you see homelessness. It's all over the news, it's on everyone's mind, and yet somehow nothing we are doing seems to be working. You've probably heard all sorts of reasons for this. I bet you heard someone said homelessness is due to drug use. Homelessness is due to mental health problems that closure of the psychiatric hospitals, who knows what. I'm here to tell you actually no. Homelessness is actually caused by really three interrelated things. And in some ways it's right there in the name, homelessness, people who lack a home. The cause of homelessness is really the lack of housing that's affordable to the lowest income renters. It's also intertwined with the ongoing effects of structural racism that really haunts our society and income inequality. The question that people ask, why is there so much homelessness, is usually really asking, why is there so much more homelessness here than there? Why is there so much homelessness in San Diego, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in California? What is it about where we live? I think the best way to understand what's going on and why it's so easy to think that homelessness is caused by other things, by substance use and mental health problems, because clearly you're not totally wrong when you look at who's homeless. A lot of folks have substance use and mental health problems, is through thinking about the game musical chairs. Anyone here remember the game musical chairs, or ever play it as a kid or with your kids or grandkids? You know, kids come to a birthday party, parents lay out the chairs, kids sort of walk around to music while a parent pulls away a chair, turns off the music, and all the kids run for the remaining chairs, right? Whoever's still standing loses and gets kicked out. So I want you to think about a birthday party where one of the kids the night before the birthday party was playing soccer, sprains his ankle, and shows up clumsily on crutches that are a little too big for him, doesn't really know what to do, right? If you're playing the game of musical chairs and you had to guess who was going to still be standing when they pulled the chair away, you'd be right to guess that it was a kid on crutches, right? So the game ends. The kid on crutches can't get to the chairs, they're still standing, and you're like, aha, it's the crutches. But let me reframe it to you. What would have happened if the parent didn't pull away the chair and there were still 10 chairs? That kid might have gotten to sit down last, but they would still sit down. And what would have happened if he hadn't sprained his ankle and all the kids, all their little soccer team were running around, right? And you pulled away a chair? Either two kids would be sitting on top of each other, or someone would have been standing. When I think about the problem of homelessness, I think about it as a problem of we just don't have enough chairs. And when I think about why it seems that so many people with substance use and mental health problems are homeless, it's because they're like the kids on crutches. But the thing is, if we had enough chairs, it might have taken them a little longer to get there, but they would have been sitting too. The reason we have so much homelessness in California is that we simply don't have enough chairs. This is a map of the United States. The red states, and it's not the red that we usually think of as red, but you know what I mean. The red states are where we have the most homelessness. But they're red here not because we have the most homelessness, but because they have the least housing. In the United States, we have a whopping 33 units of housing that's affordable and available for every 100 extremely low-income household. What is an extremely low-income household? That's any household that makes less than 30% of the median income in the area in which they live. We are short 7.3 million units of housing that's affordable to the 11 million low-income renter households in this country. But how about in California? We're one of the worst. We have a whopping 24 units of housing that's affordable and available for every 100 extremely low-income households. We are short 1 million units. What I like to think about in California is we've got 2.4 chairs for their 10 kids. We've got a lot of people sitting on top of each other, right, trying to squeeze into what we have, but we have a lot of people still left standing. The solution to homelessness is housing. Now, for years, when I gave talks about homelessness, I've been doing this a long time, which makes me think I must be doing something wrong because we haven't quite solved the problem. But for years, when I gave talk about homelessness, I would stand on stages and talk about how homelessness was a problem of people between the ages of 25 and 44. But here's the thing, I'm a practicing physician. A lot of the patients I work with are homeless. And we always know people's age when we're doctors, right? And person after person was coming in, and I was like, wait, that person isn't 24 to 44, they're older. And that person isn't 25 to 44, they're older. And yet I still stood up on stages telling everyone that they were 25 to 44. One day I was like, you know what? Either I'm really bad at math or something else is going on. And so I talked to a friend of mine, and we realized that our research group had been doing studies in San Francisco since the early 1990s, where we would recruit like a representative sample of single adults who were homeless in San Francisco, interview them, et cetera. And we literally went into the file cabinet, pulled out all the data, and started crunching numbers. And this is what we found. We found that in 1990, 11% of people experiencing homelessness were 50 and older. By the time we got to 2003, which is when our data stopped, 37% were. Now, 50% are. After we did this, my colleague, Dr. Dennis Culhane at the University of Pennsylvania, was like, what in the world is going on? He's like, I can figure it out. And he looked at data from homeless shelters across the country and started to poke around. And he noticed a very interesting thing, that in the 1990s, there was this big bubble of people using homeless shelters who were in their early 30s. In 2000, there was a big bubble of people using homeless shelters who were in their early 40s. And by 2010, that big bubble of people were in their early 50s. What was going on? He looked at the information and realized that there was this huge bubble of people moving through homeless shelters, sort of like the snake that eats the mouse, who were all born between 1955 and 1965, basically the second half of the baby boom. Baby boom, huge population. Turns out people born in second halves of big population bubbles always are at a disadvantage, who knew? But the people born in the first half kind of take all the jobs, and then there aren't enough jobs left for the people born in the second half. But that group of people also had some very specific bad luck. They came of age and entered the job market during a recession, and we know that people who enter job markets during recession never catch up with the people who entered job markets during better times. They were a group of people who entered adulthood right as we changed our policies on criminal justice, so right as the era of mass incarceration, and many of them got caught up in it, particularly Black and brown folks. And they were, importantly, a group of people who entered the housing market as adults right at a time in the late 70s, early 80s, when there was a very quiet but very important shift in federal policy that really deprioritized and defunded affordable housing. So this was a group of people who had all the bad luck. Now, Dr. Culhane said, I can't really tell. Are these people who've been homeless since they were in their 20s and 30s and are just getting old homeless, or is this something else going on? So in the way that science worked, I said, okay, I got it. We're going to do another study. We did a study where we recruited 350 people who were 50 and older in Oakland, and they were homeless. And we used all sorts of techniques to see that they matched the age of the general population of people experiencing homelessness. And what did we find? We found that almost half of them, 44%, had never been homeless, not even for one night before they reached the age of 50. I'll say that again. Amongst this big bubble of people who are homeless and 50 and older, almost half of them had never been homeless before they were 50. Now, those who had become homeless before they were 50 and continued on in homelessness had stories that sound like what we probably think about when we think about homelessness. These were people who lived absolutely horrific childhoods, full of lots of what we would now call adverse childhood events. And their lives had sort of never really gone well from there. Lots of mental health struggles, substance use struggles, lots of time in and out of prison and other institutions. Things didn't go well. But when they became over 50, they were still homeless. But those who were first homeless after 50 had very different stories. They were more likely to have worked their whole adult lives, often more than one job, but these were low-paying, physically demanding work that's very hard to do as you get older. And then sometime after the age of 50, something happened, and it was usually a pretty discrete thing, like they could tell me what happened. Either their marriage broke up, they or their partner lost their job, they or their partner got sick, their partner died, or their mom died. I heard time and time again of men in their 50s living with mom, and mom passes, their name isn't on the lease, and they're kicked out. Here's a pretty representative story of what we heard. Tragic, but representative. Our team went out and found this couple living under a bridge. They were in their 60s. The woman was blind and couldn't move half of her body after she had had a stroke. It was a lot of different things. But basically, the new owners took over. We were being evicted. My wife, she had just got out of the hospital, had the stroke, and was blind, so her daughter came up and said, don't fight it. You all can come stay with me for a couple of months and save your money. So we said, okay. They didn't fight their eviction. After we moved out of the place, turned in the keys and everything, I went over to her house, the daughter's house, and she said, y'all can't stay here. It turned out her boyfriend didn't want her elderly mother and her husband staying there. I said, I've got $9 in my pocket. I said, at least let your mother spend the night because we don't have enough money to afford a motel room. She said no, and that was the beginning. This elderly couple took all their worldly belongings and tottered to a quiet place under a highway overpass in Oakland, where they started their new life. It took about a year until they finally got housing, and relatively soon after that, the wife died, although the husband remained there. It turns out, no matter when they become homeless, people who are homeless in their 50s and 60s have worse health than people in the general population in their 70s or 80s, no matter how you measure it. If you're measuring things like their activities of daily living, do they need help bathing or dressing? Their chronic diseases, do they have high blood pressure or heart failure? How often they fall, how they walk, cognitive impairment. They do much worse than people in their 70s and 80s who are not homeless. When we look at them, they really look like much older adults. Everything then that follows, more likely to go to the emergency department, more likely to go to the hospital, more likely to wind up in a nursing home, and in fact, more likely to die. We've been following these folks now for over 10 years, and we looked at who was likely to die. So I can say a few things. Folks in our study were over 3 times, about 3.5 times more likely to die than we would have expected them to. And then we looked at what were the things that made them more likely to die. It turns out those people who were first homeless after 50 were actually more likely to die than those who were first homeless before 50. We found one thing that seemed to protect people from dying. In fact, people who had this one thing were much less likely to die. Can you guess what that thing was? Housing. It turns out that the folks who came into housing actually lived longer. When we think about all of these health problems in folks who are 50s and 60s and homeless, I start to think of them as much older. In fact, this leads me to say that when we talk about homelessness, 50 is the new 75. So what do we do about this? I think the first thing to do is to recognize that at its core, homelessness is a housing problem. And if the problem is housing, the solution is housing. There is, in fact, much we can do. And this is why I am so excited about Welcome Home. Because if we're trying to solve this problem, the first thing we need to do is address the fact that we don't have enough housing for low-income folks. The first thing we can do is take that number in California of 24 units, that's for every 100 family, and start to creep it up. We don't need to get to 100, we're not gonna get to 100, but we need to get to as close as we can. The second thing we can do is start to recognize that there are people at really high risk of becoming homeless, and to realize that when they become homeless, their lives are threatened, and we need to find them before they become homeless. The good thing is we kind of have a good lead onto who those folks are. We need to be looking for folks who are losing their jobs and are very, very poor and are paying more than half of their income in rent, who are getting sick. We need to look at folks whose marriages are breaking up, and we need to look at folks whose moms are dying. I have to tell you that this has changed my medical practice. I take care of a lot of people in their 70s and 80s, and we talk a lot about their end of their lives. I've started to ask them, are you worried if you die that one of your loved ones will become homeless and It's like the gates open up. And when I know that, there's often something I can do. But the most important thing we can do is we need to find housing for those who are already homeless. That housing has to be housing they can afford. That housing has to meet their needs as older adults. And that housing has to give them the security and safety that they need. Now, you may ask yourself, really? How about the folks who've been homeless since their 20s and 30s? The folks I see on the street who seem to have lots of mental health problems and lots of substance use problems? Clearly, we can't just put them in an apartment and leave them there. I'm going to tell you, not only can we do that, but we have to do that. We've actually done research to show that even those folks with the most severe mental health and substance use problems can be housed successfully and can stay housed. We did this study in Santa Clara County where they asked us to find the most difficult and hard to serve homeless folks. We looked through like all sorts of big data systems, and we found about 350 or 400 people who had been homeless for many years. These were folks who were the folks that every police officer in the city knew. These were folks who had been arrested many times, who had been in and out of the hospital, in the psychiatric hospital, in the emergency department. We said, you know what, we don't actually need to go out and find them because they're coming in and out of our emergency department, they're coming in and out of our jails, they're coming into our psych emergency department. We're not even gonna go look for them. We're just gonna like find them when they show up. So we actually got permission to put flags in the system. So if they went to jail, if they went to the emergency department, wherever they went, something would pop up and would say, call us. And we would show up. We didn't work overnight, so we'd show up about 7 in the morning, and we'd walk up to this person who had been up all night in the emergency department, and we would say, hey, look, I've got a deal for you. Do you want to like sign these 20 pieces of paper so that I can like follow you for the next 10 years? And if you do, I'll put you in a lottery for a 50-50 chance of housing. We approached about 350 people, and pretty much everyone said, sign me up. I think we had 3 people who turned us down. And by turning us down, I want you to remember that a couple strangers showed up after they had been up all night in the ER and said, sign all these paperwork for a 50-50 chance. We only had a 50-50 chance because that was all the housing we had. When they signed the paperwork, we flipped a coin on the spot. And if they got sort of the right part of the coin, they were signed up. Signing up meant that they had the rights to get into a housing that they would only have to pay 30% of their income from. If they had Social Security, the housing took 30% and the rest was subsidized. Signing up meant that they got a social worker who worked with them, as well as a peer, someone who themselves had been homeless, and someone who sort of had a bachelor's degree who was really good at like filling out forms. These teams of the social worker, the peer, and the person with the bachelor's degree, those 3 people would have about 45 clients, just to give you a sense of like how many people we needed to help them. We found that 91% of the people that we approached at 7 in the morning after they had been up all night got into housing, and we followed them for 7 years, and once they were housed for more than 90% of their time. These were intentionally the folks who were the hardest to serve. When you talk about Miss C, or you talk about the gentleman we found, under the highway who didn't have a lot of substance use or mental health problems, that's easy peasy. 100% of them are housed. The solution to homelessness is housing. What I like to say is that everybody needs housing. Some need services, some don't. Some just need housing they can afford. Some need a lot of services, some need a little services, but what they all need is housing, and housing ends homelessness. I want you to think about what California would look like if we didn't have 171,000 people, half of whom are older adults, sleeping outside or in our homeless shelters every night. What if the stories in the newspapers weren't all about homelessness? What if there weren't tents around our downtown? What if the Miss C's of the world didn't have to say that they were old and tired? I got my disability. I can't do it no more. Imagine that world, and imagine what a better world it would be. And that it would be better for Miss C, but let's face it, it would be better for everyone. We all thrive when we have housing for everyone. As a physician, you might wonder, what am I doing in a ballroom in San Diego talking to you all about homelessness? I do that because I learned early on that if what I really cared about was my patients' health and well-being, the single most important thing I could do for them is find a place for them to call home. I've spent years studying the biochemical pathways. I can recite all the Krebs cycle for you by memory, even though I learned it 30 years ago. And none of that really matters if people don't have a home. I invite you to join me in saying that there is no medicine as powerful as housing. Everybody deserves housing. Everyone can thrive in housing. I invite you to do everything within your power, to talk to your neighbors, to talk at your church or your synagogue or your mosque. I invite you to push back against the narrative that this is the fault of the Miss C's, and to recognize that something has gone really wrong when we have people in their 50s and 60s who really are more like people in their 70s and 80s living outside in tent. I want you to push back against the narrative that this is everybody's fault who's outdoors, and explain to people that we have only 2.4 chairs for every 10 kids at the birthday party. What did we think was going to happen? And I want you to join me in envisioning a world where we had enough housing for everyone. I want you to join me in welcoming home Miss C and having her live out her elderhood with dignity, with joy, and with purpose, and most of all, with the safety and security of home. I want you to join me in supporting Welcome Home and in welcoming home our seniors. Everybody deserves housing, and housing ends homelessness, and we're all going to be better off when we can welcome Miss C home. Thank you so much.